Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a shortcut through the complex landscape of human influence. Our mission is to uncover the dynamics of control, pulling high-impact insights from sources covering everything from major free speech debates to the pure mechanics of psychological manipulation, and the surprisingly practical steps you can take to make sure you actually get heard.
That's right. We're zeroing in on the efforts that, well, shape our attention and perception. Whether that effort is through rigorous ethical persuasion or through more subtle deception, the way we consume information and the way we communicate are constantly subject to competing forces trying to steer our behavior. Okay, let's unpack this. Okay, so let's start where the stakes feel highest, the public square. Our sources bring up this core conflict. We're discussing how to handle really dangerous ideologies like, Nazism or other regressive beliefs. One side argues that censoring those ideas actually makes them, well, more appealing, more interesting maybe to potential converts. Is ultimate freedom of expression truly the most effective tool against genuinely bad ideas? It's a sharp divide, really. This debate splits cleanly into two main approaches. On one side, you have what we could call the openness camp.
Okay. Their argument is that flawed ideas, they must be rigorously debated, countered, and even ridiculed right out in the open. Their central idea is confidence. If an argument is dishonest or based on lies, it should be easy to expose, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant, that kind of thinking.
Exactly. And repeated public exposure will defeat it. They argue that censorship just drives these toxic ideas underground, shielding them from the very criticism they need.
I can see the logic in that, the sort of purity of the argument, but where does it seem to fail in practice? Because we see toxic ideas not just surviving, but often flourishing, even when they are countered with facts.
Well, that's because the proponents of restraint, what you might call the anti-censorship camp, though it's more nuanced, they argue that relying solely on facts is often, well, ineffective. They stress that people are not, and I think the source phrased it well, perfectly logical automatons.
Riff from it.
Lies and dishonest arguments, especially those fueling extreme ideologies, operate primarily at the level of emotion. When fear or anger or tribal loyalty gets activated, facts and logic often just lose the engagement battle.
So if an argument feels emotionally satisfying to someone, they might just accept it uncritically, regardless of any data that opposes it. Wow, that sounds like a terrifyingly effective propaganda strategy.
It is. And there's another vital, often overlooked piece here, the exhaustion factor. Constantly having to debate and counter and refight these fundamental issues, especially ones advocating for things like genocide or violence, it's absolutely exhausting. Yeah, I can imagine.
Why should targeted groups be repeatedly forced to spend their time and energy just validating their own right to exist? The proponents of hate will just start the debate again and again, benefiting from the sheer demoralizing stress it puts on their opposition.
It almost moves the goalposts, doesn't it, from a battle of ideas to more like a battle of endurance.
Precisely. And this leads us to the critical takeaway from looking at these two sides. The openness camp, it operates on a potentially dangerous assumption that those who oppose dangerous ideas are inherently good debaters, or that they even have the inclination and the time for that rigorous engagement, right? Which isn't always the case.
No. If we rely solely on public debate to defeat extremism, the whole system kind of collapses if the people fighting it are ill-equipped or tired or simply lack the time. When emotional appeals are running high, the risk of relying on debate skills alone is just, well, it's very high.
That puts a whole new premium on understanding how influence actually works, maybe regardless of the ethical intent behind it. If pure, rigorous debate often fails against emotional manipulation, we really have to shift to understanding the mechanics that do succeed in changing behavior, the art of intentional influence.
Okay, so to understand this, we need a fairly objective definition of manipulation, one that tries to separate the mechanics from our immediate moral judgment of it. Our sources tend to define manipulation broadly as the effort, and this is key, regardless of eventual success, by one party to change the behavior or perception of a target, usually toward the manipulator's own predefined goals.
Defining it by the effort. That's interesting. But isn't persuasion also an effort to change behavior toward a goal? Where does one end and the other, begin?
It's a famously blurry line, absolutely. But the core strategy, often pointed to in manipulation, is successfully using the goals of others to further your own goals. If you know what someone values, maybe it's wealth, security, a sense of belonging, or even just simple distraction, you leverage that intrinsic desire to steer them where you need them to go.
Okay. So the person being manipulated thinks they're moving toward their own interest, but in reality, they're serving yours.
Precisely. And the three main tools often discussed for achieving this are power, persuasion, and critically, Deception. Deception, in this context, is defined quite specifically as the successful control of information. Think of people as information processing systems. If you can control the inputs, the data they receive, you can reliably alter the outputs, meaning their actions.
That feels like the ultimate lever, doesn't it? If I can control what you see and what you believe, I effectively control what you do. Can you give us a real-world example, maybe a high-stakes one, of this kind of information control?
Sure, we can look back almost 1,000 years, actually, to the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. William the Conqueror was facing Harold Godwinson's forces, and they held a massive advantage fighting from atop Senlac Hill. William knew a direct frontal assault would be incredibly costly, maybe even impossible.
Right, uphill battle, literally.
Exactly. So what did he do? He ordered a feigned retreat.
A fake withdrawal.
Yes, a simulated panicked flight. Harold's troops, probably excited, sensing victory was imminent, broke their disciplined shield wall formation and streamed down the hill to pursue the apparently fleeing Normans.
Oh, no.
They completely sacrificed their strategic high ground based entirely on deceptive information. Once they were down on level ground, William's elite cavalry wheeled around, reformed, and essentially cut down the now exposed and disorganized English line. It was a brilliant piece of strategic deception that utterly changed the outcome of the battle and, well, the course of English history.
Wait, so even winning one of the most famous battles in history can kind of be distilled down to a brilliantly executed high-stakes information scam. It's actually astonishing how basic the mechanics seem when you put it like that.
They are quite basic, fundamentally.
Right.
And they're effective precisely because they exploit fundamental human tendencies, specifically what we might call irrational behavior. Think about endlessly scrolling our social media feeds. We're sort of gambling, aren't we, on whether the next piece of content will be interesting or just drivel.
Yeah, the dopamine hit lottery.
Exactly. We know objectively that the expected reward from endless scrolling is probably quite low, but the app successfully exploits the same basic risk-reward mechanisms that make playing the lottery, or slot machines, so appealing to some. It keeps people engaged through instinct, even when the behavior is, statistically speaking, pretty irrational. That realization itself feels powerful, just knowing that our own instincts are often the weak point that influence attempts are targeting. Okay, let's try and move this from historical warfare and abstract psychology to the daily battleground, the group meeting. If the world is this constant competition for attention, how can you, the listener, make sure your voice isn't just ignored or constantly talked over in those chaotic group dynamics, like, a frantic strategy meeting or even a loud family gathering where everyone talks over each other? Well, first, I think you need to set some realistic expectations. Group conversations, especially in professional settings sometimes, are often less a formal, polite debate and more of a no-holds-barred competition for airtime.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Expecting perfectly orderly turns is often just unrealistic, and interrupting is frequently, if implicitly, condoned. You often get talked over, not necessarily because your idea is bad, but because your delivery, your speaking style, is maybe ineffective. Perhaps speaking too softly, using a hesitant or questioning tone, or taking those overly long pauses that signal to others, okay, they're done.
I've definitely been in those meetings where it felt like I was physically fighting just to get a word in edgewise. It almost feels like you need a bit of an aggressive instinct sometimes.
It often helps, frankly. One critical strategy our sources point to is developing the instinct, the timing, to jump in at just the right moment. Often, the most opportune time is actually just as the last speaker is concluding their final sentence, kind of cutting off the very tail end of their thought before anyone else can grab the floor.
So you have to sort of preempt that silence, that transition point. Okay, and once you've successfully grabbed that moment, what's next? How do you hold it?
Then you need to make sure your opening sentence is delivered loudly enough to clearly establish control of the conversational space. Volume really matters when you're claiming attention, especially in a dynamic group where people might be excited or easily distracted.
Okay, volume, timing. What about physical presence? Does that play a role?
Absolutely. Use nonverbal cues constantly. Leaning forward slightly, sitting up straighter, maybe making direct eye contact with the person you're responding to or the main decision maker. These are all physical signals of your intent to speak and hold the floor. If you look down or kind of shrink back physically, you're signaling retreat.
Right.
And finally, once you have the floor, try to be succinct. Have a rough plan of your key point. Don't just ramble or start adding tangential off-the-cuff thoughts once your main point is out there.
Yeah.
Every long pause you take is basically an open invitation for someone else to jump in and seize the opportunity.
It really sounds like being heard is maybe less about the intrinsic merit of the idea itself and much more about the kinetics of the delivery, how
Yep.
you actually insert it into the conversation.
That principle of delivery kinetics, as you put it, is perfectly transferable to more formal settings, too. Speaking of controlling attention, if we shift from the potentially chaotic group chat to, say, a professional presentation, we need to apply similar ideas of information control to make sure the message actually sticks and we avoid the dreaded death by PowerPoint.
Ah, yes. Death by PowerPoint. We've all been there. What's the fundamental psychological mistake most people make with their slides that leads to that?
Well, the failure stems directly from ignoring how our brains actually process information, what psychologists often refer to as cognitive load theory. It's really just a way of saying your brain has a limited working capacity, a limited bandwidth, and standard presentations just completely overloaded.
Not so.
They're typically text-heavy, crammed with bullet points, and they end up acting like an electronic chalkboard, where the audience is just sort of passively trying to read or copy the text. This overload completely exceeds the capacity of our short-term or working memory, and that directly leads to disengagement and, frankly, almost zero recall later on.
So trying to read the screen while also listening to the presenter talk about the text on the screen is like a cognitive bottleneck. We're basically asking the audience to do two competing things at once.
Exactly that. You're forcing them to read, process written language, and listen to spoken language simultaneously. It splits their attention and tanks comprehension. The solution often recommended is the assertion-evidence slide format. This format forces clarity and respects our cognitive limitations by distributing the load more effectively.
Okay, assertion evidence. How does that work structurally? What does it look like?
The structure is actually quite elegant and simple. At the very top of the slide, you write a single complete sentence that serves as the assertion. That's the slide's one key takeaway message or thesis. Then below that, you place a relevant, informative visual image or graphic that serves as the evidence supporting that assertion.
Ah, I see. So no more bullet points in the main body.
Exactly. It eliminates those bullet point lists entirely from the slide body itself.
Okay, so the presenter would speak the detailed evidence or explanation, while the audience processes that single headline sentence at the top and looks at the visual proof. So instead of a generic title like marketing results, the assertion might be, our new mobile-first landing pages boosted conversions by 30%. And then the image below would be the graph showing that jump.
That's precisely the mindset shift. It dramatically reduces unnecessary text on the slide, which adheres to something called the redundancy principle. Don't present the same info in multiple ways at once. And it leverages the multimedia principle, which shows that combining spoken narration with relevant supporting graphics results in vastly superior learning and retention compared to text alone or narration alone.
Right.
Furthermore, it forces the presenter to actually clarify their main point for each slide right up front, and it helps avoid those detrimental effects of purely decorative images or irrelevant graphics, sometimes called seductive details, that look nice but actually distract from the core message and hinder learning.
So the goal then shifts, doesn't it? It's not merely to transfer a pile of information, but to actively structure it as a compelling argument, supported by visual proof, and really manage exactly where the audience's limited attention lands at any given moment.
It's really the difference between being a passive information vendor, just dumping data, and being an effective guide who actively manages attention and facilitates understanding.
Wow. This has been an incredible deep dive into the dynamics of influence, all the way from fighting extreme ideas in public debate to the very practical control of attention in the boardroom or even just a noisy meeting. We'd love to hear your take on this. What are your thoughts on how debate and censorship influence the acceptance of extreme ideas? Drop a comment and let us know, and perhaps something to mull over. If we accept that manipulation at its core is simply the effort to change behavior toward your own goals, and we know that successful communication inherently requires controlling attention and sometimes even deceiving our own instincts, like with that addictive social media scroll, where does the simple act of trying to be persuasive end and the darker, more exploitative side of influence truly begin? It's a difficult line to draw, and that's a wrap on our deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll catch you in the next one. Do subscribe to our channel so you never miss the new videos.